So we're recording now. Good morning, Keith. So today we've had a bit of a warm up. I'd just like to make a potential apology for any sound quality or visual quality. Keith is in Sydney, and I'm in Christchurch, New Zealand, and we are working with copper wire, crossing many thousands of kilometres. Some point, it turns into fibre, and then it goes copper again. So we're doing really well. Well done. So Keith is going to read something out which he wrote, which I think is we've already heard. I've already heard, and I think it's just really relevant, and it'd be nice to have some conversation around it after you've read it. Nice. So what are you getting at? Hmm. It's interesting because you say that, and I immediately am thinking about my daughter who's 14, and she's been having challenges at school. And she'd be the only one having the challenges at school, of course. Um, but she's had this kind of little thing where she comes up, she wants a hug, and she just says, life sucks. You know, and it's a generalization, it's a normalization, I guess. it's an internal representation that she's probably hearing, and also she's been watching a lot of these TV on demand. So she's been watching, because we don't have a TV, and so we can't stand TV. But now that she has an iPad available that is primarily for research for her school, but she simultaneously watches 4 things at once, and there's a lot of learning these kinds of ways of perceiving the world. And I think what I'm noticing is, because just yesterday I said, so everything sucks, so everything, and I said, so what specifically isn't working? And she goes, well, it's just the assignments I have to do. I said, right. Is it all the assignments? So immediately kind of what we'd call chunking her down into a more clear identification of what's actually not feeling good. And then she'll come, everyone's awful. So everyone. And it actually turns out it's just 1 or 2 girls that are, across the board just regularly behaving in ways that are less than appropriate. And I think that's something that we don't know how to do when we're, in the first 7 years, let's say the first 7 years, give me a boy before 7 and I'll give you the man, And there isn't that the knowledge of knowing how to have a conversation where one can be moved from a generalization or a normalization or a dissociation into an awareness that they're feeling uncomfortable because of maybe one thing. And that one thing they're feeling uncomfortable is not actually necessarily anything to do with them. It's to do with someone else's view of the world or view of them that they're then reflecting back. And that becomes that constricts our capacity to learn, because what we'll do is we'll start operating within that field, because we just want to be okay in that field of friends or mum and dad or whatever. And so then that curiosity drops off around, yeah, but what's over there? And as soon as we chunk, what specifically, for my daughter, it's like she starts going, looking for, well, what is actually this about? Yeah. And it's also a question which is a reflection. So you're reflecting and questioning in tone. So everything sucks. So you're repeating back. So she gets a sense unconsciously that she's heard, and yet there's a question in the hearing. Everything sucks. So yeah, and that's actually quite an unconscious response, because she could consciously say, "Oh, piss off," which has happened. Yeah. And sometimes she does, and so I piss off. Or I say, piss off. Which way? Yeah, would you like me to hop as I piss off, or just, do I? on that point, which is really interesting, I was at the market this morning getting some eggs, and as you know, I've been working with this post-concussion syndrome, which is still ongoing, and I met the doctor who I've been seeing, and my first kind of internal perception was a little bit of an internal dialogue around how I actually felt about the response he had initially to what I told him, which wasn't necessarily that good. I personally just felt like I wasn't really getting the hearing or being heard. So I realized that was really influencing my internal representation of him, which then my body didn't feel light, and it didn't feel kind of open to having a conversation, and all, power to him, in a sense that he kind of said, so, how's it going? And I said, well, it's actually just not much better, and he said, yeah, okay. And then I said, how are you going? So I just turned around, because with post-concussion you can't do anything, and really, other than rest and maybe take drugs. But fundamentally, the drugs don't work and the rest takes time. And, I mean, the drugs might work, but who knows. But fundamentally we got onto something else, which was what was going on in the world outside of not being well. And then he talked about something which was really, I was quite strongly passionate about, which is, he's got a baby now, and he says, I just can't believe I'm filling up the red bin before the end of the week. And it's like, I'm having to borrow other people's red bin space to stick the nappies in. And I said, yeah, and he says, it's just disgusting how much we consume when we have babies. I said, yeah. And I said it, and also, and then that got me onto human waste, where, the whole, it got me, and I started wiring up. And I hadn't had coffee, and I started wiring up into, because for me it's a kind of distributed, everything's connected, and for me it's about consciousness. It's about how we perceive these things, and then I felt my energy lift, because it was because we were finally talking about something, and then it occurred to me, because I just picked up Path of Least Resistance, and I can't remember the author's name, Fritz, I think is his last name. And I opened it up, and it was a beautiful thing from Carl Jung, which is around, what we constantly try to do is fix a problem. And the challenge with fixing a problem is you can't fix a problem. It's never worked. What we have to do is shift our perception to a different level of consciousness, what we'd call in NLP maybe a reframe or a reframe. Let's start with that. And then that immediately turns it from problem state into transition state. So it stops being a problem, it starts being something that's in transition. Yeah? That's what that reminded me of. Lost my track. Must be the brain damage. But yeah, I mean, it's that same. So I think what that conversation was about for me, and what you were reflecting back, was that how we internally perceive what is going on externally and internally, and how am I representing my world to myself, and how much of that is programmed or just automated response based on maybe how the context I was brought up in. The rules, the regulations, the religious, the political, whatever it might be, and how much, and is there scope for new or a different consciousness perspective of the situation that I'm in? And so I came away from the market going, I really need to shift my perception of what's going on from, I'm a bit broken, or I have a problem, to actually I'm just in a healing process and I'm in transition. Having spoken to enough people who've overcome cancer, they don't see that cancer was this thing that was there to kill them. They see cancer as a thing that was there to help them transition, because they weren't living how they really wanted to live. And that is actually a different consciousness, and that's what NLP does. If you give someone a choice point around their perceived problem, they're not in problem state. They've got now a different state of consciousness through which to see that thing that was a problem. Yeah. Yeah. Hmm. Hmm. Well, and that's, I mean, like I, had supervision of it in a sense with a colleague here in Christchurch just the other day. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to check my own internal representations of what's going on around the situation that I find myself in health-wise. And it was quite eye-opening that there were some strong internal representations that weren't useful. I'll be first to admit that, and I don't mind admitting it. And I think that's, and so for me, in a role where I do this thing called coaching, there's often that perception that, well, as someone who does coaching, you should be able to coach yourself out of whatever this, but that's kind of like learning to swim while you're drowning in deep water. It's like, it's just like, well, could you teach me right now because I'm you need someone on the outside to notice the incongruences. Because I was using my body language, I was using my, the eye movements. She was going, yeah, but what about that? That word? Could we just? And it was really, really interesting. It was just, and a thing that came up as a strategy was just to interrupt myself, and then go into visual and generate 3 new possibilities of what to do next. What's my next move? So that brought me out of reverie or hallucinating a future and brought me into, well, actually, what's my next move? Okay, and look at 3 and then choose the one that viscerally feels the most compelling and do it. And that's sometimes as simple as it can be. But as soon as we generate those 3, then we're out of the loop. Well, that's the trick, isn't it? Yeah, and that's... Yeah. Mm-hmm. There's a really interesting dialogue going on at the moment, and that is around this perceived leader of the free world and his conversation with the perceived tyrant of the not free world, and the dialogue being around Trump's position and how he has been reflecting upon his meeting with Kim Jong-un, and how he's saying, well, he's a very intelligent man, and he's and he couldn't have got to where he is through. And so what Trump is doing, and I think quite consciously, because he's getting so much media over it, is he's actually reframing everybody's consciousness. Because as soon as you hear someone, because the general pattern of conversation is Kim Jong-un is a tyrant, he's a dictator, he's killed most of his family to get where he is, he's blah, 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 blah. So Trump's perception of all of this is he's a strong man, he knows what he wants, he's very clever about how he goes about it, his country love him, and then they show all the soldiers, goose stepping along the road, and it's a total reframe. It's a re-engineering, because as soon as that idea is out there in enough of the consciousness, and it is, because everyone watches TV pretty much, or watches on YouTube, whatever, then that possibility is now there. And all Trump wants to do, as we know, and he's even owned up to it, is he just wants to put Trump towers all the way along the coastline of North Korea. I mean, he'd make it load. But fundamentally, he's not saying that as much as he's trying to, and that's that really fine line. But that's the power of reframe. That's the power of entering in that conversation, but from a what if, or from a, he's not so much a tyrant as he just knows what he wants. It's like, well, how many CEOs work that way? He's not a tyrant. He just knows that to make this business work, you got to fire 50% of the workers, and replace them with droids, and then the shareholders go, oh yeah, no, that makes sense. And then, commercial world and economic growth goes, oh yeah, that makes sense. And then it's done, It's interesting, but I mean, it's, on a real global scale, we're seeing a reframe. It's actually okay for a sexual abuser to be in the president of the apparent free world. Someone who's been... it was interesting because the lawyer who's working for Stormy Daniels, the porn star, was asked on TV how many other women have come out with a similar story against Donald Trump. And it was Stephen Colbert, and he says, so just stop me lifting fingers when I've got to the number of women. And then he put both feet on the table, and the guy just said, got any more? So, but what that's doing is it's a very sad and yet very interesting conversation around, does that make it somehow okay? Because this guy hasn't been indicted, he hasn't gone to, but he's obviously done these things. And at the same time, he's having a conversation and reframing our perceptions around a tyrant. And yet the dialogue we're hearing is he himself is a tyrant when it comes to business and women and those sorts of things. It's just a very, very, and yet so it's been normalized that actually that kind of thing. And I only bring that up because I've just noticed there's a wee bit of dialogue about it out there, but it's also like, well, it's somehow okay. And that's what we grow with as we grow up. On a very micro scale in a family or in certain political situations or certain religious or even bullying at school, there's an element of, it's not acceptable, but there's not much we can do about it, is there? So we just kind of tolerate it and we gradualize ourselves to become accustomed to it, And that then influences our internal perceptions of ourselves and others. Good question. Mm. Mm. Oh, that's not possible, surely. So how's it going to work though? I mean, because as soon as you start that conversation, is extremely broad. It's like that conversation. I mean, you're talking about that can be applied to politics, to you know religious context. It can be applied to. I mean, there was someone the other day who said, "Well, I just have to do what the doctor says." It's like, excuse me. Who are you paying a doctor, or like have you employed you like you have to do it and it's like, all due respect, they know a lot, but they don't know how you feel, and they don't have your intuition, and they don't know what is right for you. They know what is mechanically possibly useful to you, but they have no right to tell you that you have to do this. And that is, and in all due respect, it's not that you're saying don't do it, it's just you're saying, well, you still have choices around, which you still have a freedom. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. But you see, then you get into that problematic place of a thing that is called anarchy, which has always been that word has always been mistreated, because anarchy does not actually mean against the state, or it actually means that you're self-directive. It means that you're you know what is right for you, and you act upon that. And if we all actually acted from a place of what's right for us, we'd probably actually find there is more harmony in our world than the opposite. So anarchy is actually, we end up actually coming back to a state of equilibrium where we actually know what's right for us, and there's a universality to that. Need shelter, need food, need love, need those sorts of things, and we find a way of balancing that out like nature does. But it's no good for the powers that be, who want to tell us what to do. Well, they are. Mm. 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 Yeah. And something really interesting along that same line is this whole, the global climate change scenario, which fascinates me and continues to do so. Is that because people say, well, if we don't do this and this, then yada yada yada, and so we've got to do this by 2000 and whatever, yada yada yada. The challenge with all of that is that and it's the trouble with actually goal creating. The challenge with goal creating and these sorts of things is we're creating a goal from a consciousness that is not the same as the place where the goal is supposed to be. So at this place where I am right now, I mean, check me on this, because it's just something that's come to mind a lot lately, is that, if I'm in this state of awareness and consciousness right now, let's say living on this planet. So it means I've only got a certain kind of technology, I've only got a certain type of scientific knowledge, and I've also got only a certain type of political awareness, all these different things, and I have very little self-awareness, let's just add that as well. And I'm making decisions based on that about, so how I see my world and my future is limited to that. So if I'm trying to make a goal for the future, it's inherently unecological, because unless I'm somehow a time traveler or a futurist, I can't know 2050. All I can know it is from the mechanics of where I'm at the moment. Yeah, so I can't know that in 2050, I can't know that it's true, and we've already known, and it's been, this climate change thing has been replaced over and over and over by a new dialogue and whatever, because we get to this year and we go, well, it's not actually what we thought it would be. No shit, because it's like we're not able to, we don't have a crystal ball, they don't exist. And Donald Trump is proof that we don't have time travel, or ninjas, or assassins. So fundamentally, Jason Bourne, forget it. Matt Damon doesn't exist. Matt Damon. But everyone loves a montage. Anyway, so fundamentally, so what my feeling is like, but one thing we do know, and we've discussed this at length, and I think it's in a couple of your books, is that, if we, however, were to perceive ourselves in the future delightfully surprised by what we've been able to manifest. You see, what we're manifesting at the moment is we're seeing ourselves in the future dead. I mean, some people are saying that by 2050 we'll be extinct as a human race because, oh my God, and Kilauea and all these different things, Don't believe it for a moment. And so, because it's looking at everything from where we are at, and mostly consciously, And you only have to read a good science fiction writer to know that it's junk, to some degree. But do you know what I'm saying? So, I mean, it's almost like we're so... So when I'm thinking about bullying, coming back to that, is that, as you're saying, we make the bullier, we nominalize the bullier, we make them the bad person, and then the victim feels bad because they're suddenly standing out because, and this happening in our court system at the moment, the people have to go through so much interviewing and so much to prove that what was done to them was done to them. The cross-examination, they get traumatized over and over. Meanwhile, the guy's just standing up there, and just waiting for the verdict, But the victim has no resources through their life to know how to deal with, because no one knows if this is ever going to happen to them. But there's no resources, no mental, emotional skill pattern or strategy given to them from a young age to know how to respond. So, in that sense, they have only a consciousness, strategy, awareness, political, emotional, whatever it might be. They don't have the ability to go to that next place. Am I making sense here? I don't know. I think, yeah. It's really hard to I find English language so difficult because I kind of get a sense of what I'm trying to get across, but it's just so limited sometimes, how to... Because of that consciousness thing, Because I'm trying to talk about something that I know exists in the future, that is where we are more delighted and surprised by the outcomes we're generating through curiosity and creativity and intuition and possibly science and those sorts of things. And yet there doesn't seem to be a language available to know what that descriptor is, or what that, how to, other than what I just said, Anyway. let's do a goal that's like, because one goal is a question that you'll often ask someone who's not well or doesn't feel well, and you'll say, so what will it be like when? That sort of thing. Or are you talking about more of a material external goal? Hmm. 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 And we know that, sorry to interrupt, but and we know that to be, outside of consciousness, we know that to be true just biologically. Even just biologically, we're going to be different tomorrow. Yeah. Hmm. Hmm. Hopefully. No, I actually don't, because this has been on my mind so much, and I get a sense more and more that what I know that I'm wanting to experience more of is a sense of connectedness and community and um, contentment in environment. And that doesn't have a time to it. It doesn't have a place to it at the moment. It doesn't have, but there's a very real sense that I can picture myself experiencing something that I don't yet know how to experience. And I think that's what I'm talking about. It's like I know that even the environment we live in suburban Christchurch, and there's aspects of it that are lovely and wonderful and lots of stuff, and yet it's not where I find my contentment. It's not where sorry. Yeah. It was creativity, curiosity. No. Oh, connection. Yeah. 3 C's. Oh, sorry. Sorry, there was. Sorry, because I went off for a moment. So it's contentment. No, it was community. Well, I guess. Yeah. There'll be someone who's watching this going, "Come on, man! You said it. It's." Yeah. What? Connectedness. I think connectedness. So I think connectedness is something that I can have control over, because we're connecting here. I connect with my family. I connect with friends. Connect with my family in Auckland. So there's that. I can initiate. Yeah. Well, I see my family as an aspect of community. I can connect with the school community more. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I mean, for me, that's about connecting within more. So it's like meditating, doing those sorts of things, and also I've just noticed over the last couple of days while doing Skype with clients is that there's a fantail, Waka Waka, which is come in to get all the bugs around our chickens, because the chickens are just out there, and this thing flies in, and it's the one with the big tail. I think there's one similar to it in Australia. It's got a big wide tail that fans out, and it means they can flutter around everywhere. And so there's a sense of contentment from really noticing the beauty of nature in this context. The bees. We've got a beehive, and it just you see the bees zipping by every now and then, and that sort of thing. So yeah, I mean they're all part of the same thing, and I think that's the other thing that I find quite interesting as well is, can they ever be separate? There's a sense that everything interreacts with everything else, and maybe that's problematic because it gets a bit too generalized or too meta, too large. And yet, I mean, I guess I can create a sense of contentment through the different strategies I have, regardless of whether I'm connecting with the community or not, regardless of whether I have a sense of connectedness on the day with someone else or not. And what I've learnt through or felt through meditation is one thing is that builds a sense of connectedness. There's a kind of like what Sheldrake calls morphic resonance. There's a sense of like I just somehow feel connected to the body of humanity, I guess. No, I have it momentarily, I think. Momentarily I have it, and then, life happens. Yeah, yeah. It's pervasive. I mean, it's always there. It's always there on some level. And yet, I think that's a really interesting thing as well, is that, there's that saying from spirituality is be in the world but not of it. Meaning don't attach too much to it. You're in it in your own state of beingness or connectedness, whatever you want to call it, and you're kind of you're just Shakespearean wise wearing the mask, playing the game. There's the Waka Waka just went by. But and it's just noticing that kind of, and noticing what that feels like when I notice it, and that being the goal reached. The mindfulness, I guess. It's a mindfulness. And yeah. Yeah. And I think, what that also leads to, in having meditated for 26 years now, is there's a sense of more and more of connecting with that deeper layer or deeper awareness. The more important it is to not be attached to the outcome. Because if I am, then that removes the fluidity of life to actually give me something way more than I ever thought possible. Because if I'm fixated by, well, it's got to be here and it's got to be doing this and it's got to be blah, 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 then I'm really limiting the expansive or emergent potential of what is actually available to me. Tony Robbins talks all the time about, just go for stupid outcomes, stupidly huge, big, crazy shit, because the chances are you'll get it. Which kind of makes sense. Can I just, while you're saying that, can I just say that when you say those things, I do get a mental kind of sense of behavior around those things as well. So I get a sense of what that could, like if you were to paint a picture, I get a sense of what that might look like. I hope, because some people say it's got to be sensory specific as an outcome. It's got to be it's got to be a sense of like, well, how will you know you're there? Yeah. And I think, so, because immediately I just hear a whole bunch of NLP people going, Jesus, that's not an outcome, that's just a piece of fluff. And I totally agree on one level. And yet as I say those things, connectedness, community, and contentment, I see myself operating, I see myself doing, even, I see myself eating with a group of people that aren't just my family. I see myself maybe working more with nature and with people than in a square room, boxed off and separated from what we call life or nature, decontextualized for an hour and a half with a client. It's like I see it more as a holistic kind of process. And yet I don't know where, how, or when. And I don't want to know in a sense, because I want it to be a surprise. It's like I want it to be something that, wow, this is cooler than I thought. I give an example. Can I just quickly? I wrecked my ankle 2 years ago, wrecked it, and it was like, so I had to, go off work and take ACC and all that sort of stuff. And, it was constantly in my mind, how long is this going to take? Because it was just so sore and it was swollen up and all this sort of thing. But I thought to myself, well, I how many times have I hurt myself, like cut myself, or when I was doing karate, or all these different things, I'd bang or whatever. And then I'd suddenly realize that it's not there anymore, or the thing's healed up or whatever. And then I thought, well, I know. So I kind of pictured myself out there just going, oh, that's great. Wow, I can't feel it anymore. Well, no lie. It feels good. No lie. I was climbing a scaffold a year later. And I was climbing the scaffold and I suddenly went, wait a minute. I can't feel my ankle. And then I suddenly realized that I hadn't been feeling my ankle for at least maybe a week or 2 weeks. And I was just overjoyed. Not because I just thought it was, it felt like, wow, my body can do amazing shit. It's like, wow, this is the coolest thing. So I think that's what I'm getting at, because those experiences are so powerful and so meaningful. It's a, before enlightenment chopping wood, after enlightenment chopping wood. Can I tell you a story? I took a workshop up in Nelson because I developed a migraine technique to give you better migraines. No. And and I wanted to test it out with a group of colleagues. So we was invited to do this workshop and ran this migraine technique because there were a couple of people who had migraines, but it was basically so they could help people with migraines. So anyway, it's quite funny because just recently I was working with one of the people on a one-to-one, just coaching with one of my colleagues and kind of supervision, and it was so funny because we were talking about that technique, and so she said, it didn't really work because the person I was working with, I didn't really get where they were coming from with the technique. Now the technique, you frown, I know. So the technique is pretty generic. Like it actually, I've found it to be very usable with so many things, not just migraines. But because migraines are so easy to calibrate whether there's a shift or not, it's a great technique. So I did it, and then, but as this person was leaving, she said, "Yeah, but I don't actually get that many migraines anymore." So it was like what? And Milton Erickson used to talk about this, and Bandler and all these, because Bandler has the famous video of the guy who couldn't leave LA by car. Have you seen that one? It's a famous video, and so it was all at the beginning of NLP where they're kind of testing the waters, see if the shit works, and so they bring in the worst case scenarios. Like this guy could not drive, if someone said we're going to, like, he'd get to the edge of LA and throw up. It was like, seriously, he'd just have to get out of the car and throw up. He was so phobic. And so Richard Bandler did this whole thing, and it was basically just a dissociation process. It was beautifully done, utilizing the guy's already, the structure of how he was doing it, but then kind of expanded it, took it out. And then 6 months later, they had got them all the same people back to talk about what had happened. So they only had one session, and so the guy said, nothing has really changed that much. He said, so you haven't been out of LA? Oh, no, I go out of LA regularly. Okay, so was there a point where, I guess I was just in the car one day, and I was being with my friend, and we were just, and I suddenly realized that we're halfway through, the Arizona desert, And he goes, I'm in there. Oh, okay. And so it's just this, it's just this kind of evolving image where suddenly he's just being driven through. Normally he would have thrown up. It was 3 or 4 months later, but it was such a sense of, and this is where NLP has a bad business model, is because it's designed to make it feel like the person's actually done it all themselves, because they have done it all themselves. They've just been given some new strategies that they can potentially use if they want to or not, in order to do something new. And because it's so much more compelling than to doing redundant stuff, then they tend to do it. But it's such a good story. Mm. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Mm. Mm. Yeah. Now, the caveat we have to say here is, once again, I'm just going to reflect back on The Path of Least Resistance, which is a really interesting book to reread. It was written back in the 80s, I think, but he talks about Beethoven. And everyone goes, Beethoven was a genius and blah, 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 yada, yada, and yada, yada. And Beethoven, since he was a boy, worked solidly on understanding music. And he was shaped by and tutored often by Brahms and those guys. And he worked tirelessly on becoming and producing what he produced. And so he was, he possibly had an already existing attunement, there's no doubt. But I think more importantly, had an overriding curiosity about music and sound and emotion and all those sorts of things, and how it was all combined into a note, you know, that was so profound that it meant he felt. So I guess the problem is, because you're going to get some people, it's like that, what was it, that bloody thing, The Secret, you know, well, all you have to do is imagine that you've got $1 million and somehow it'll just turn up. And we're not talking about that. You know, I feel it's really because that'll be some people out there going, yeah, so what you're saying is all you have to do is just imagine that you're going to get a delightful surprise and your life will be, you know, richer for the better. Well, actually, no, I'm not saying that, but that works way better than just imagining everything's going to fall down the toilet, you know, and we're all going to die. Yeah, it's a definite improvement. And the likelihood, and they've researched this now, there's a great book called Curious, and written by a doctor of psychology, or it doesn't matter, but it's a great book. I mean, there's a number of books around curiosity being written at the moment and have been written recently. And what they're researching is that when you actually shift your awareness from, oh my God, we're going to die, to, oh wow, that's interesting, your neurological structure reshapes itself so that it can look for opportunity. Yeah, and that's what we're talking about, right? Or what you were saying in the statement you read out in the beginning was, as a child, there is no fear as much as there is curiosity, and insatiable curiosity. And that's what leads us to developing certain patterns of behavior that are useful, but also sometimes patterns of behavior that become habits that aren't useful. You know. Yeah. Mm. Yeah, well, Michael Hall, who's the preeminent meta states guru, the other tangent of NLP, has written and talked at length about that. You know, because he had so many people ask, well, if you're so damn good at coaching with NLP, how come you haven't modelled success with money and made $1 million? All of you. What's wrong with you? Yeah. Mm. 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 Yeah, and I mean, if you're living if you're really good at NLP, but you're living in a population of 200,000 people or something, or maybe like 100 people out in rural, and you've got a little bit of a Skype connection every now and then, you know, the chances of making, unless you're charging $1,000, you know, per half hour, the chances of making enough money to get the Ferrari, even though you might work 7 days a week, are much more limited than if, you know, so context is also really important, you know, and what we're learning now, I mean, certainly we've talked about this enough, is how you get butts on seats. You know, I mean, I worked with a guy years ago. He was a client for a while, and he has a couple of extremely successful businesses. One of them is still, he's sold off as a director and has been, and just such a brilliant business person. I sat down with him and said, listen, I want to make this work really well, and I want to have 10 practitioners working in a space, and I want to have its own space, and it's got a professional, like a doctor's surgery. You could work in the doctor's surgery, and there's 10 doctors working there, and they've got a receptionist and everything like that. So he went away, and he did the numbers. And this was in Auckland, So we got, at the time, 1.4 million people in Auckland, and it was in a place in Auckland which was kind of up and coming and very wealthy, starting to be really wealthy. I mean, Lord now lives there, and all these different things. And he came back and said, "Nah, can't make it work." And it was just simply because what we needed to get butts on seats, what we needed to charge butts on seats, what we needed to earn just to pay the rent and the receptionist, all these different things. And it was really stuff that I can, and he just had spreadsheets for all of this. But see, the thing is that it's not that it couldn't be done. It's just that the context didn't allow it to be done at that time. Or the only way that we could see it could be done, couldn't be done at that time. And having worked with a number of agencies where they had multiple different kind of practitioners, all of them struggling. Unless they sold potions and blah 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 and had a little shop front where they sold, retail, really difficult to and it wasn't necessarily to have a profit. I guess what I'm getting at is that but the dream was still there, the idea was there, but you've got to do your due diligence, and sometimes even with that, it might not work. So that's where, like for we've got some of the best musicians in the world, and one of our best musicians is now one of the Fleetwood Mac team. Neil Finn. He's just joined Fleetwood Mac for, I think just for our tour, because one of their guys died apparently. I don't know much about it, but I think that's true. Forgive me if it's incorrect. But anyway, he's now touring with them. But Neil Finn had to leave New Zealand with Split Enz to go Crowded House and do. To get to the level, they couldn't have done it in New Zealand because it just isn't the and so context is also something really important, and that's where, and context can also mean, well, what are the values of the people around you, and I guess why I'm bringing all this up is because, it's an ecology check. And the thing about some goal-setting things is that they lack ecology. They lack an understanding of, well, what is the context? What is the timing? What is the actual cost? And what might be the cost to my health? What might be the cost to my family? What might be the... and we don't actually know that here because we're running from this one filtered perception, They are, yeah. Mm. 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 Yeah, let's go with that. I mean, for me, it's a sleep centre. Love the idea of a sleep centre. Has a clinical. It has a retail aspect. It actually has pods, so people can come in and do 20 minutes in a pod. 10 stamp ticket, all that sort of stuff. So and it's also got a room where you can do workshops, blah blah blah, seminars. So it's quite a broad scope. But so I can picture that. I can see the water feature in the front. I can see so I've got it all mentally mapped. So I can see that. I can imagine walking in. I can see myself and other practitioners working in there. I can see it, but it's, and it's quite clean, quite clear. Yeah. It's a sleep centre. Yeah. No, I can see myself. I can do both. I can imagine walking in, but I can also see myself here. Yeah. Yeah. And what I can see is myself every time I walk in there going, oh yeah. Oh yeah. Just confident, just relaxed, kind of, you know, yeah, just confident and relaxed, really. And also kind of like really just, I think, just really curious about what's going to happen that day, who's going to come in, how can we best, help their situation, because it's never about sleep. That's the thing, it's never about sleep. It's always about everything else. Yeah, totally, man. Totally, yeah, totally. Mm. Yep, I'm in there. I'm in there. Yeah, yep. Yep. Mm. It's warm. And it's a little bit, I can hear a flow form water feature. There's a flow form water feature. And, yeah, I can hear that. And there's, no, it's quiet. Inside me, it's not. There's no dialogue. It's just an awareness. No, and I can hear. There's someone talking to the person that's meeting people. So it's not like a reception as such, because that's so kind of. There's just a sense that there's a kind of a meeting place where you can just ask questions but it's quite high tech as well. There's quite a bit of high tech in there. So if you don't want to talk to anyone, there's kind of like you can actually just plug into something on the wall and just tap away and get an idea. Mm-hmm. It's light. Oh, what's my body like, or what's the? Just light, healthy, strong, stable, grounded. Curious. Yep. Well, it feels exciting. And with that kind of, not Tony Robbins exciting. It's like, it just feels, yeah. Well, it's what I'm feeling with it, and with that comes a question of how can I be of assistance or use to someone? How can I bring my tools, bring my resources, bring this whole thing together? How can how can I best help someone to get what they need and to get that need met? And it might be that they just need a new pillow. Well, great. It might be that they need, a coaching session or 4 or 5 or whatever. It's whatever, and we can have that conversation. Yeah. Yep. I think a sense of, it's a sense of relief, because it feels like it's a long time coming. But also a sense that, of value. It's like it's meaningful. Hmm. It meets a certain, I want to do work with people that is meaningful to me, but also possibly meaningful, hopefully, to them. And but it's not so much that it's work. It's kind of what would you call it? It's more like what's that word? We've found your, it's kind of you kind of found. No, I don't know. It's more like it's vocation or something. It's almost like you found your calling, something like that. And so it's like, no, this works. This feels right. I'm in the right place. I'm $5 million in debt doing it, but fuck it, who cares? Excuse my language. But, and the bank's loving every moment of it. And I have a really good relationship with the bank on a daily basis. Yes. Yeah, no, it's in the mail. It's all good. What? We don't use mail? No, it's still in the mail. It'll get there. Oh, we can do it. No, it's in the mail. It's just a check. Yeah. I'm very cautious about using that word because it's so overused, and yet I feel it feels right. It feels right in this moment to be doing this, and the years and years of trying to get other people's money to do it feels like it's paying off. That's my cynical aspect coming in, And I'm in Singapore. That's the other thing. I'm in Singapore where there's 5 billion people, and they just love unique, crazy shit with technology. So it's like I'm in the perfect place. The population can sustain this. I mean, I don't know. I can't imagine a New Zealander walking along a street and going, "Oh yeah, I'm going to the sleep centre," or having to tell someone, "What'd you do on Friday?" "Oh, I went to the sleep." "You went to what? What'd you do that for?" Over a beer or something, or half a side of mutton and a beer over the barbecue. "So what'd you do?" "Oh, and I went to the sleep." "What? What's wrong with you?" Just drink, man. Just drink. Yeah. I'll cut that bit out. It's vocational. It just feels right. And I guess there's a meaningfulness to that. Yeah. There's a meaningfulness to that. Excuse me. Yep. No, that's all it is. It feels right. I mean, there's just a calmness that comes with that. There's that feeling of contentment that comes with it. That I mean, it makes sense to me to. Yeah, there's also a logical aspect to it. In terms of a world that is very much about, it seems, about purchasing stuff. About purchasing services, but also there's a sense of wanting to go shopping for things that will help me be well or help me feel better. It kind of ticks those boxes. So there's a kind of an element of, so it kind of across the board, it kind of makes sense to do it this way. Even outside of the online obsession that everyone has, there's a significant population that still wants to meet a human. And even then might be directed to a room where they pod out for 20 minutes and get deep rest, but they're still meeting a human and having a personal relationship, and then they might, you can't beat, even though there's that robot that does Rogerian therapy. It just sits there and you go in and you sit down with it, and it's a nice looking robot. And it just basically says, so what you're saying is da-da-da-da. And people walk out after half an hour going, "Oh my God, that was just so amazing. I feel so different." And all the Rogerian robot was doing was going, "So what you're saying is, so that must feel." And But the robot is actually looking at, it can actually register color change through infrared. It can register dilation and all those. So it is actually reading the person. It'll even say, I noticed that you've taken a deep breath. What might that be meaning for you? And it's beautifully done. But I mean, in the end, they're talking to a robot, you know. Yeah, I don't like it either. But I mean, you know, but for some people, you know, that's. I mean, think about how many people are relying on a sleep app at the moment to get to sleep. The problem being that it's a dissociation. It's an external place. But in the same conversation, a coach is an external reference point. And maybe it is a really useful way of getting back in alignment with the sleep patterns or whatever. You know, if we can kind of get more understanding about, I didn't know that I'm holding my breath for 15 or 30 seconds while I'm sleeping, then you can maybe talk to someone about how to, fix that or work with it. You know, so there's value, and yet if it becomes a crutch, you know. Anyway, off track. So there's contentment there, and there's a sense that within that space there's a community of people. We're all working with this, connected with the same kind of. There'll be values, there'll be a mission statement, but there'll be kind of like a culture around what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we do it, and there'll be a little bit of, well, there's some strategies that we generally can use straight away to help someone, even if it's just helping them to feel comfortable with their situation, and there's. And there's that connection. So you're not just connecting with each other, you're connecting with the people who come in, and then they go out and connect and say, well, I had this really unique experience. It looked really whack job, but when I came out of that session, it was like, wow, I didn't know that I could do that, Yep. Well, you see, the thing that I feel it brings straight away is sharing ideas. Is kind of think tanking, sharing ideas, sharing. When I've noticed of late, and possibly because of the situation I've been in, with my brain, but is that doing soul charge, soul business is actually quite a big thing. You've got so many aspects to a business, no matter how big or small it is. But if you're running it on your own, it's like, well, there's a lot to kind of orchestrate. Whereas if and that's why a lot of people are outsourcing now. The great thing now is you can have Xero do your accounting. You can do, you can have someone who, you can go onto Fiverr.com and they can, design a logo for you. You can have someone who does a website. I mean, you can do Wix in half an hour apparently. Build a website in 10 minutes. And you can do all that. So there's a lot of outsourcing that makes it easier, but you can't talk to those people. You're kind of giving them a directive, and they're working to a template, but you're working with already existing consciousness, as opposed to when there's a community, there's a sense where you can discuss and broaden or expand or create new kind of ways of thinking, or and that's what I like, the idea of. Yep. It's just contentment again. It's contentment again. It just feels right. Yeah. Just yeah. Hmm. 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 No, no, no. You're using the same words, and if I were to think about it from a financial perspective, I mean, all due respect, to my cynicism earlier, but I mean, if it's other people's money, I mean, that's how you make something like this work. You have to borrow money generally because the fit out would be $1,000,000. I mean, that's just how it works, and I've known enough people who've set up their own business to know that would be kind of how where the ballpark is, and that's probably not including key money and monthly. You might get a rent relief for 3 months or something, but fundamentally it's $1,000,000, and I don't have that. But fundamentally, if it's worked out right and the numbers are done, you get the butts on seats. Then there's a sense of and you're able to. Well, you have to pay. I have to pay myself. Well, if that'll all be worked out to some degree before it's even, before there's a paintbrush lifted or a hammer gun lifted. So I mean, fundamentally, if we're at that point, then there's a sense, I don't know if it would be contentment, but there's a sense that this is working well, considering, on the financial level. Well, I mean, there's an element of caution, because I mean, you don't have to go very far around the block to talk to someone in retail who's just scratching their head, going, "Oh my God, what's going to happen tomorrow because of Amazon and whatever." But if you're doing something that is service and product, and is actually dealing with the second most biggest problem globally, which is sleep. So anxiety and sleep just run the gauntlet with each other, and around the world. Then there's if you get your marketing right, I mean, you'll get butts on seats. The challenge is you've got to do it. The challenge that I think the one thing that comes to mind immediately, which doesn't feel satisfying, and there is a way around it straight away which comes to mind, is that it is potentially a higher end market. Because if you're in a space, you're dealing with $100,000 a year, you're dealing with $1,000,000, your interest alone means that you actually have to charge more. And so, but the way around that, which a couple of, I know, medical practitioners do in Auckland, which is they have one day a week where they see people for $20 a session. So one day a week, you bring in your community services card, and for your rest pod you get it for $5. And it works because the other people subsidise that, and you might even be able to get funding if you run it as a non-profit, or you run it not a non-profit, but you run it as maybe a trust even. Then you can do that, and you're not running profit. You're running, you just, so that could be. So there's the beauty thing also about the community aspect is you can actually, do it as you can. If you come on as a practitioner and you really like it, and there's an alignment with values, you can say, well, okay, well, you can buy an aspect of this, or invest into this, but then it doesn't necessarily work. You do it as a cooperative, which is a whole different business plan, and that could mean that people get something out of it personally, as an investment aspect as well. So I mean, there's 100 ways of running it, but I think I don't just want it to be something, because walking around Christchurch, there's all these people who are just there's a lot of poverty. There's a lot of people who have no money, and if they were able to lie in an amazing situation, lie down, close their eyes, and get some beautiful sensory experience with something that motivates them at the same time, and did that for 4 weeks, they come out the other end, they possibly have a shift that might be useful to them outside of their mental illness or whatever it is they're also dealing with. I don't know. And Mm. Mm. Maybe we'll set it up in Sydney. You got the population of New Zealand lives in Sydney. Oh, do it, man. They're awesome. Yeah. Mm. Well, I mean, that's, daily meditation, going for a walk, writing poetry. Re- yeah. What was it? Well, I mean, reading a book. Um, no. Coaching generally brings a feeling of contentment. Generally, sometimes it's really hard work, but still there's a sense of, no, this is right. This is right to be doing this. I mean, sometimes it's just, Jesus, it's hard work. It's like, you just got to stretch. What else? Yeah, there's nothing else that really. I mean, I really enjoy doing this. I don't know if it's contentment that it brings, but carry on. Mm. Yep. Mm. 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 Yep. I guess the first thing is that it kind of makes sense to go with the goal. Just the other thing that came up that is good for contentment is woodworking. I really enjoy woodworking. I actually also noticed that when I was doing the stand-up comedy, there was an element of there was a contentment in there. There was like it was really quite weird, but there was like, well, I love doing this. So this is cool. And especially when there's feedback, laughing. So yeah, there's that, so those. I mean, woodwork is potentially a way to earn an income as well. Comedy not. That's a hobby. And a distraction. And yeah, so I guess the first thing that comes up unconsciously is the woodworking and sitting with wood and working out, just making something up, and then suddenly, oh my God, it's a table or a chair or whatever it might be, and how cool that is. That's this very similar kind of feeling, and the thing I like about that is there's a real tangibility around, on so many levels. All the senses are engaged with woodworking. And then go from there and ask, well, what else can actually bring me to that? Yeah. Writing poetry. Yep. Yep. Mm. 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 But if it's the only, and that's where it's not ecological, and we see so much of that happening around us. I guess just another one that came to is a walk on the beach. A walk on the beach is extremely, yeah. Mm. Unless you're holding a selfie and you're doing a YouTube channel as you walk along and just talking shit. Just talk shit. As long as you may be cute and 18. Shh! I never thought of that. And with their clothes on. Who would have thought? Should we cut that bit out as well? But not today, because I'm just a time check. We're at 1 hour 34. Yep. Yep. Yeah, agreed. So can I give you some feedback that's just occurred to me, is that, and this happens in coaching, is what I've just become aware of is a sense of contentment that has just occurred because at an unconscious level I wasn't fully aware that I could, that firstly, that because I've been kind of putting that goal to the side. I've just been putting it to the side. I've drawn pictures, I've done it, but I've kind of thought, I honestly, in my heart, I haven't been able to see it work in New Zealand. It's just, and that's a limiting perception on my part, very much so. And it's just because I need to look at it from a different perspective or something. But more importantly, I love what you did with taking it to the higher level. And then what I loved was coming down to what are the other things. And I think that's the thing that what I know from the unconscious is sometimes the unconscious can get very narrowly focused on this is going to generate this outcome at a higher logical level. Oh, but it's not happening. Forgetting that the higher logical level can actually be met through many avenues. And I think that just in itself, the whole body just went, oh yeah. Oh yeah. That, because there's the ecology check that we were talking about earlier. It's like, well, it's not ecological that everything sits on one goal and one outcome, and we've seen people self-destruct with that, and for whatever reason it might be that they put everything into something, and it's not through any lack of their own effort. It just isn't the right thing to work, but they've attached everything to it, including their family's health and well-being. It falls through the floor. There's nothing else that meets the high, that can give the higher logical level. And I think that's the one thing, because I was querying this, forgive me, but I was querying this around the concussion. And what I had to come back to was, well, actually what I can do, what I'm doing on a daily basis with meditation is, regardless of what's happening in here and how that influences the rest of my human biome, is regardless of what's happening in here, I can self-generate calm and contentment through meditation on a daily basis. And I can actually just sit down at any point and do that. And I can be anywhere and do that. And so regardless of what's happening in or outside of me, I can do that one thing. And that is my immediate connection to calm and with that contentment. And so, but what you've said is so beautiful. And so for the listener, in NLP, the essence of defining the goal with clarity and having a sensory specific experience of what that looks, sounds, smells, tastes, feels like, and maybe even spiritually aligns with, gives us a much higher sense of how important it might be or not be. But when we find that higher value level, we can then also recognize that there are other ways of meeting that through things that don't necessarily mean money or food or whatever, but there's so many ways of meeting that, so that then we can allow for, there's a safety around it. And I think that's been flexibility, you're nice. And also we're more adaptable, so that if something kind of weird happens with this goal that's in process, we can step out and engage in something that connects us with that calm, in my sense, that calm feeling, which then gives us the ability to see more of what's actually going on inside the problem state, you know. And that's a nice circular loop back to where we started off, which is internal perceptions, you know, and how we see or perceive what's going on inside or outside. And the question might be is, well, what can I effect or influence in this moment, you know? And the only thing we can answer that is, well, what am I doing to, what am I doing to this perception that is giving me the experience that I want? Is that kind of... Yeah. Mm. Mm. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and you talk to a lot of people who have a lot of money, they don't feel that stuff. Yeah, yeah, because yeah, and that's that mismatch. You know, we're given this goal, and yet if you actually talk to a lot of millionaires or a lot of people, you know, one of their greatest fears is losing the money. You know, through fickle investments or just the fickle nature of business. You know, so it's it's really important questioning to. Mm. 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 Yeah, and you know, the really interesting thing about that is, which is what came up with the coaching the other day for me, was she said to me, so, and this is what you're talking about here, is it was about, well, what are you able to identify that you can do in this moment that'll connect you with that higher logical level? So if my whole life is based around focusing on that one goal, and only when I reach that one goal will I have those higher logical levels met, then I'm not in the present moment. I can't be. I'm dissociated. But if I can recognize that I can connect with those higher logical levels now, and it might be through reading, walking, whatever it might be, then that means that I can, when things aren't going well with the goal, I can pull out and go, well, wait a minute, I'm going to self-generate security maybe. So how would I feel secure? Go to bed and wrap myself in a nice blankie. And so and it might be some people, it's like they just want to wrap themselves, so I'm going to wrap myself in a nice blankie. But the beauty of that is that's what I can do for me right now that puts me in a feeling of safety and security. All the doors are locked, the Rottweiler's outside, and I'm inside, And so if that's what's required and that's how it feels, then I've got another option. And if we can add 20 to that, that's what I can do now. And that allows for the goal to be released, and for maybe those morphic resonant aspects, those other aspects that we just can never plan for or know when they're going to pop in, to do their work. Such a cool conversation. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Mm. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Mm. Mm. Cool. Mm. 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 Yeah. And then can we be open to the possibility that it'll be so new we have to learn it, Uh, yeah, yeah, and yes, yeah. Well, yeah. But having said that, I was reading about Les Mills. Les Mills, which is in probably every major city in the world now. Well, Les Mills is a New Zealand created fitness thing. They actually have Les Mills stars. Like there are people, if they go to Hong Kong and there are so many people who go to Les Mills. The DVDs and videos are so loved and watched that some of these guys, men and women who are the trainers, will go to some of these places and they'll be swamped. They're like stars. But the reason that Les Mills went overseas was because, well, there's just a bigger population, and with a bigger population you have a much bigger niche market, so you'll get more people coming to your thing. And also, if you go to America, where there's this perception of supporting something that is high energy and yada yada, and that's just what they've been trained to do in their culture, and to buy the shit, the branding and everything, and own it as your own, well, which I don't resonate personally with, but if that's the culture, then you just go there, and if you build a big enough statement of intent there and a business there, well, you can go anywhere from there, because then it's just a matter of you borrow the money against the business you've already got, and it's such an amazing model. I mean, in commercially it makes sense, and for him, when you talk to Les Mills, it totally reaches his highest values. You can see it on his logical levels, and the guy is, he's 80 something now, and he's got an exercise bike in his living room, and he lives in a mansion, and he's got a fitness studio in his garage. I mean, he lives the game, And I think that it's a lovely example. But I think for him, knew he had something that's amazing. Also knew that it's got a glass ceiling in our population, but he wanted to go further. But I think also some people, I think from my reading, is some people also saw what he was doing and said, "Shit, man, this is unique. Let's get this going." Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. We will. Cool. We'll see you next time. You're on lulu.com. Just look up Keith Gilbert for your books. Have you got your Pearl there? Yeah. So you've got Pearl. So Pearl's a beautiful book about an alien that comes down to Earth for a day. And that's on lulu.com. Just put in Keith Gilbert or Pearl. Yeah, and there's my sleep book. I don't know if you can... No, let me just adjust it. Yeah. Better sleep sooner! And that's on lulu.com and aaronm.co.nz. So till next time. Ciao.